Nothing has really changed. The heartbeat message hasn't changed, but the expressions of it have developed wonderfully and in kind of very creative ways, and journeyed along with as culture and history and technology and everything has changed. And so it's a living truth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not just a propositional truth that's timeless. It's dynamic, and I love that aspect of Torchbearers. Yeah.
Welcome to this week's episode of the His Hill Podcast. My name is Kelly Doherty, and I'm your host. Today, I have with us Peter Thomas. Peter has been a part of Torchbearers his whole life. He is one of the sons of Major Thomas, Major and Joan Thomas, and we have him here this week as a guest lecturer. So I thought if he was willing, it'd be great to have him in and have a conversation with him, and he is. So Peter, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Kelly. Good to be here.
It's good to have you. I appreciate it. I know you're not feeling well. You're getting better, but I appreciate you being able to, or being willing to do this. Sure. Peter, let's just jump right in. Would you tell us where? Let's just talk about your early years, where you were born, what it was like growing up in your family, and then we'll just go from there. So
Sure.
Tell us where you were born.
Okay, I was born in the north of England, where Cape Henry Hall is and exists, and was actually born in the castle, room 19, if you want to check out the spot. I've been back, and there's no plaque on the wall. I'm kind of disappointed, but maybe when I'm dead, they'll put something, a poster, maybe a sticker at least. But so I grew up in the midst of that big community because there was always lots of guests initially, conferences, and then later on Bible school, or fairly early on. So growing up into that was the world, and the world came to the castle, so I didn't think there was much else. It's a farming community, so quite passive and delightful, and my friends at school were all farmers' kids, so I always wanted to play at their house because they had tractors and barns and stuff like that, and they always seemed to want to play at my house because I had a castle, and a tower and dungeon, and they could be a King Arthur or something. But it was just a beautiful, and I think that era, post-war, was pretty optimistic and positive, and a rediscovery of humanity and community. And so even this local school and the church worked together. Festivals, like in England, we celebrate November the 5th, Bonfire Night, which is, they tried to blow up Parliament, and that's history. So we celebrate that, and I think we should reintroduce it maybe. But so it was very much a healthy, looking back, probably a bit nostalgic. How good was that? My brothers and I, we could just randomly walk over any paddock, through any farmland, through forest. My mum had no idea where we were. There was no cell phones. There's no time limits or anything like that. Just we'd be gone for the day. We could be north, south, east, west. And there was no fear factor of strangers or abuse or any of it. Just wasn't even in our thinking. So I see it as pretty idyllic. And my brothers and I, we chat about it sometimes, and we go, wow, we were blessed. We were favored. Not just us only, but that generation, I think, without maybe doing justice to how good that was, that there was an optimism in the world at large. Things were getting better. We were recovering from damage of war. There was the beginning of the threat of communism. I remember praying one night with my mum, Lord, bless everybody in the whole world except the Russians. And she corrected me and said, Peter, they're the ones we need to pray for. Now they're going to come and they're under my bed, they're coming in the window, they're going to destroy us. But apart from that distant threat, it was a really great time. I'm really grateful. I get on super well with my brothers still. We're around the world. I'm in Australia. Chris is here in Colorado, and my brother Mark is in England, and my youngest brother Andy is in Canada. So we're pretty much taken over the world, or working on it. But we're so close. And I think a lot of it is due to that very precious heritage that we were given. Yeah.
Well, how old were you when you came to faith in Christ?
Well, growing up at Cape Henry at Torchbearer Center, you hear Jesus before you hear Noddy or Big Ears, or if you know those children's characters. So Jesus was always part of my life in terms of a reality, because my mum and dad knew him, prayed to him, spoke of him in a real way. So, but I do remember pretty early on praying and asking the Lord to forgive me for my sins. And I was probably literally 4 or 5 years old. Don't know what it meant, but I prayed a number of times because just hearing a simple gospel, the gospel would penetrate my simple mind enough to go, I do need Jesus, and I have to pray for him. Other people are called to pray to receive him, so I did. But it was really only the time I look back to when it really became my own was when I was 12 years old, and my dad and mum wisely, in hindsight, sent me away to school, so to a boarding school for high school level. And in a sense, it was a wake-up call to, okay, I've lived in a Cape and Ray world, which has been beautiful, and I've no shame about it. But I'm now living in another world where Jesus isn't mentioned. If he is, it's a curse. And it's just nobody seems to live that well. And so, and initially, I literally, the night I arrived, I was in the dormitory with 17 other boys, and I got on my knees to read my Bible, just because that was my habit. And the other guys were staring at me going, what are you doing? You know, and I'm going, well, aren't you going to read your Bible? And so they mocked me massively for those first few weeks, and I gave up doing it. But it kind of determined in my heart that either which is the real world, my home life where Cape and Ray is, or this world where these guys live and the school is. And so due to go home for my holidays, the vacation that Christmas, and I was kind of going to just check everything out, even at that age of 12, just to which side of the fence am I? And I was so grateful. At that Christmas, there was a conference, there was a house party, and the speaker was a man named Victor McManus, and he was from Ireland, and he had an Irish accent, and he got a powerful testimony, and I don't know if it was the accent or his testimony, but one night he said, it's really important that you know you're a true Christian. And that phrase just penetrated, and so after that meeting, I went to find my mum, and I was only I just turned 13, I think, and said, Mum, I want to be a true Christian. And so that night she led me in a prayer, showed me scriptures, walked through the gospel. I knew it, but I know I prayed. Not for the first time probably, but for the first time with a conscious, deliberate intention to give my life to Jesus. And then she said something, in hindsight, it's very profound, because I had prayed many times. And so she said, Peter, it's time to stop saying please and to start saying thank you. You don't need to keep asking Jesus into your life. She said, it's like somebody comes to our front door and they want to come in, and you say, come in. They're in. You don't have to keep going to the door and say, please come in, please come in. And it was a very simple, just what I needed at that age. She said, from now on, you can say thank you. God is as good as his word. Jesus has promised to come in. So you can say thank you. You never need to ask again. And so that stayed with me. And so I really identify that moment as when I owned, in a childlike way, but a valid way, that Jesus wanted to come into my life. And I could thank him. And I've never needed not to thank him ever since. Yep.
That's neat. So, you know, you're the first Thomas that I've had on the podcast. And I haven't been able to ask this question of any of your brothers yet. What was, since you grew up at Cape and Ray, so you've been around Torchbearers your whole life. What were those early years in Torchbearers like? What are some of the changes you've seen in the ministry? And you know, what are some of your thoughts with that?
Yeah, wow. There's two aspects probably. One is there's no change, in that the dynamic and the heartbeat, the centrality of Christ has never changed, and God willing, will never change. It doesn't mean that we're locked in a bubble and we're, not relevant to the culture or sensitive to our cultural changes, which are massive. And in my decades of life, seen an incredible shift away from a consensus that Christianity was good, even if it wasn't a faith. Christianity provided a good country, good order, good education, good hospital system, university, justice system. That was the consensus that Christianity, the Bible, historically had provided that. Obviously, that's a massive shift into current cultural positions. So nothing has changed in it, and the message never needs to change.
Right.
But it does. But there has been other changes. So very early on, my experience was Cape Mara was packed with people, and many of them. There was two levels. There was, as I say, initially it was a lot of conferences, so guests came, and it was a holiday, but a holiday focused supremely on the messages that were given morning and evening, and the rest of it, sports, hiking in the Lake District, and campfires and things, were very secondary. And the people that came were very ordinary and very genuine. And then into my world came a whole lot of Germans. And some of them were guests, but when the Bible school started, the majority were Germans. And I was conscious, I'm talking about when I was 10, 11, 12, that we were post-war, that there'd been a war, my dad had been in the war, and so I wasn't sure how to react necessarily. And then over time, and particularly because my mum and dad exemplified a real love for these young people, my dad particularly saw a nation of great young people, great caliber, damaged by an evil regime, and just needed correct leadership and message of truth and hope and valid stuff. And so I began to identify with that and enjoy that fact that these were once my enemies, once hated us, and now they're my friends. And probably right at that very early age, there was a young, he wasn't young to me then, but I realized how young he was now, a German guy called Heinz Fussel. And I'm the third boy of two older brothers. They're both taller than me, 6 foot plus. I'm little 5'10"-ish, probably 9 1/4, but I make it 10. And so inevitably, Chris and Mark seemed to get most of the attention of people who came, and I was this little squirt that was hanging around. Andy wasn't born yet. But this guy, Heinz, who was German, seemed to favor me in that it wasn't me third, I was often first. He'd say, "Peter, do you want to come horse riding, or do you want to go camping or swimming in the lake or something?" And he mentored me without, I don't know that if he would know that word or had an intention, but even my quiet time at night. And I remember one time he came up to join me and to say goodnight, and I was reading my little Bible, and he said, "What have you read?" And I said, "Oh, I've just read this chapter, and then I wanted to get my comic. I just wanted to do justice to it." And he said, "Well, why do you think Jesus isn't interested in your comic?" And I'd never thought of that concept. Jesus was only interested that I read my Bible and prayed and ticked that box, and then I could kind of get it off my back, and now I can read my comic. He said, "Why don't we talk to Jesus about your comic?" And I'm going, "Well, the comic's all about cowboys and Indians and stuff." He said, "Well, tell him what you like about it." So he made me pray, not made me, but he said, "Why don't we just pray and say how you like the adventure of being a cowboy?" Because I wanted to be a cowboy growing up. And so I got to talk to Jesus about wanting to be a cowboy. And it's a tiny, tiny little thing, but it just opened up my realization that Jesus wasn't just about the rigidity, but he was about my whole life, and he enjoyed me enjoying life. That's so important. You never have a holiday from Jesus. Take him on holiday; he'll enjoy it with you. So, Cape and Ray, that influence and that shift over the years with Torchbearers starts very, very foundational, but it's not lightweight. It's if you don't get the foundation right, everything else is going to fall ultimately. And I'm glad that I'm only a part of the whole family and journey. But it's so exciting these days to see, as I said at the beginning, nothing has really changed. The heartbeat message hasn't changed, but the expressions of it have developed wonderfully and in kind of very creative ways, and journeyed along with as culture and history and technology and everything has changed. And so it's a living truth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not just a propositional truth that's timeless. It's dynamic, and I love that aspect of Torchbearers, yeah.
I appreciate you articulating that. With our business, we have devotions with employees every morning.
Wow.
And then we have discussion with it. And that was something that was brought out by one of the employees the other day, just the understanding that, for me to say Christ is my life means for me to say Christ is, being at work today in this business. And, but isn't that what that's what we want people to hear us saying, that Christ is, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You don't have to be a Bible teacher. You don't have to be a pastor. If that's what the Lord has for you, then you better be. But to understand that our ministry is where the Lord has us, and that it's just as much of a ministry as, the evangelist.
Totally.
And hopefully that's what our students are understanding, what our guests are coming to understand, that, this really revolutionizes whatever it is that the Lord has before us. It's something that I've had to really work through, leaving full-time here at His Hill and being away from it pretty much, except for coming back as a guest lecturer and being on the board here, for 6 years before moving back, was a really hard time for me to navigate, to work through it. I had to work through some depression with it. And Arlene had to pull me aside. I remember right where we were, outside in between Mom and Dad's house and ours. And, I was just really down. And she said, Kelly, you've got to understand that you are still very much in ministry. It looks completely different. You don't have students sitting in front of you, but you've got two elderly parents that need to see Jesus today. And that was sobering to me.
Absolutely.
And I'm so thankful for it. And it was a process. That was kind of the beginning part of it, but it was a process of the Lord bringing me to that, to understand that, Kelly, this is what you've been talking about for decades. Now, are you really gonna trust? Are you gonna trust me and breathe and move in what I lay before you? So I really appreciate you articulating that, because that is the ministry of Torchbearers.
Exactly. And I think when you think of the students and the hundreds, thousands who've been through a Torchbearer school, the majority clearly have not gone into ministry,
right,
as we would define it,
right,
in inverted commas, but they've gone into life.
Right.
And as you said, God isn't going, I've got this category and I've got this lesser category. It's just be my ambassadors, be my life, be an expression and sometimes it's more critical that we're in places that He'll place us that are not comfortable, and it's not ministry is not comfortable, but defined for us. But it's every day, the whole of our expression of His person through our humanity, in our context, in our profession, in our social life, in our media life, in our creative life. Every aspect is sourced in Christ and expressing Him. And I'm excited about, it's not just Torchbearers, but any believer who grows into maturity and becomes a man or woman of God. That's the ultimate purpose of walking with God and being a Christian.
I agree. Okay, being the number 3, and being a son of Ian and Joan Thomas, did you ever feel extra pressure from that?
Actually, not much. I could make a case, but wouldn't be valid, because Mum and Dad never put any pressure on us to conform to Torchbearers in any way, shape, or form. In fact, my dad did the opposite, and this is a bit of a well-known story, but his policy with his sons, all 4 of us, was to kick us out of home and in effect say, here's a one-way ticket to Timbuktu, come home when you think you've grown up.
Literally.
Virtually.
Yeah.
In that Chris literally got a one-way ticket when he left high school and went to New Zealand and came back 2 years later having worked on farms and earned enough money to pay his way home after 2 years. Mark, my next older brother, he got sent to Ethiopia, a 2-way ticket because you can't earn, but it was open dated, so come back when you think you're ready. So Mark went and he worked with MAF, Mission Aviation Fellowship, and loaded planes and traveled over Ethiopia, brilliant, and that's still his heart. He goes to Ethiopia now in his 70s. So I got sent to Peru in South America with an open-dated ticket. Spent 9 months around in Peru initially with the Irish Baptist Mission, and then visiting various Wycliffe Bible translator bases, because Dad had contacts. But there's no internet, there's no email, there's no cell phones, there's no connection. You're just gone. And all I got from Dad twice, maybe 3 times in the 9 months, was an aerogram. If you remember it, those who know aerograms, and there's no money in them, you know. And so I'm just having to make my way. But I was 19. But I really respect the fact that Dad understood that we needed to make our faith our own, make our own moral choices, because there's no supervision, and come home when we are ready to think we've actually matured a little bit. And my younger brother Andy, he got sent to India, and so he spent 6 months, I think, or so there. So in hindsight, that was a really growing up time, because I saw a whole different world that had nothing directly to do with Torchbearers, but there were Christians, there was missionaries, and just traveling on your own. I mean, I could tell you stories of situations I got myself into naively, being a foreigner in a totally different country. So I've told the family I ended up traveling with some illegal money changers from Peru to La Paz, Bolivia, with a guy at the gun at the front of the truck and paying off bribes and getting the border town where all the money changing was taking place, because they followed the international currency changes, and all illegal. And this big mama who was in charge of this gang of people, and I only got involved because I was playing soccer with the local team, and he said, "Oh, you're going to La Paz? Go with my friends." And so, free ride. I took it, and then found out this is probably not what Dad had in mind when he told me to go to Peru. But it was just an exposure to a totally different world. And I look back and I think it was God's wisdom really through my dad to give us freedom to not just be forced into a Cape and Ray mold, a Torchbearer mold, but to live the world, but celebrate how Torchbearers is able to connect and shape out of choice, not out of forced at all. So, and I did 6 years outside of it's not a bubble, but out of the family.
Yeah.
4 years of university and 2 years teaching school, and took a year's break, went to New Zealand, and on return was going to pick up my school teaching role again. They kept it for me, but then at the same time, Cape and Ray Hall invited me to join staff. They had a gap there, and they thought might be helpful if Peter could come and just fill that gap. And I thought, yeah, I owe it. Let me pay my dues. So kind of thought a couple of years I'll serve on staff. It was registrar position, but also ministering to students and running ministries. So I expected initially to be there a couple of years and then I'd go back to my school profession, but here I am. I won't tell you how many years, but many, many years later, still happy to be part of the Torchbearer family.
That's great.
Yeah.
So you went to, where did you go to college?
Lancaster, St. Martin's College is part of Lancaster University, close to Cape and Ray.
Yeah.
But I lived on campus. It was the days when the government paid for you, so they didn't give you much money, but they let you have a bed and some food.
And that was there to get a teaching certificate?
To get a degree in education, yeah.
Okay. So you went back to Cape and Ray thinking it would be temporary, but it definitely wasn't.
Yep.
And so how did the Lord, what did he do? How did he put you into this full time? And what's this been like? Where's he taking you with all of this?
Well, from that initial commitment to work at Cape and Ray Hall, because I'd been to New Zealand, there was a call from New Zealand, would somebody from Cape and Ray come and just help the program there? And because I'd been there and I loved it, and my hand went up first. And so I got sent to New Zealand only on a temporary basis to help run a program for 3 months. We ran the Cape and Ray program at another Bible college, the Bible College of New Zealand in Auckland. And our director in New Zealand, Noel Hunt, and his wife Doreen, outstanding people, been missionaries in the Middle East. And they became my mentors, became so influential in my life. So I worked under Noel and it was temporarily initially for 4 or 5 years. I'd go each year, and then it became it's too complicated to go into all, but became long-term. So I became full-time involved in New Zealand and Australia. So that's where I've been for the last 35, 40 years. But it's always been just the same heartbeat. And because it's a big family, and being responsible for the ministry in those two countries at times and backwards and forwards, I was also able to interact with the other Torchbearer Centers around the world and our international conferences. So it's just been a journey of step by step, and a bit like my dad. My dad, people would say to Dad, wow, you must have had a great vision, when you started out this ministry. And he said, I had no idea what I was doing. I would just take one step, the door was open, and keep going and look back and go, oh, that's what God was doing. I said, I had no idea there would be 25 plus campuses around the world. That was never in a vision that he had, other than that if the door's open, go through it. And then now and again, have a look back and see what God's been doing. And so I think that's been true of all of us within Torchbearer leadership. We don't have an ambition to build an empire, right, but we are not hesitant to be God's kingdom on earth and to express that. And sometimes it's in Bible school, sometimes it's camping ministry. Now it's got more diversity, and it's growing in its capacity to reach different levels and different contexts. And it's exciting, I think, for the future. I've never been more excited about Torchbearers than today. It's fantastic.
Now, we have somebody else sitting at the table, and I just thought, would you like to join us? Sure. Okay, let's put a headset on. Peter, do you want to introduce this person?
Yeah, I'm very happy to introduce this very precious person. This is my wife, Elizabeth Thomas, and who is Australian, and I met when she came as a student to Wongabrae, which is our campus Torchbearer school in Australia. And she's got a Wycliffe. Well, you need to tell your story, darling. Yeah. But so this is my wife, Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi.
It's good to have you. I'm sorry to just throw that on you all of a sudden.
Yeah,
but
really?
I was sitting here. She's sitting here. What's wrong with you? Put a headset on her and a mic in front of her. Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about your life. Where do you come from?
I come from Australia, born and bred there, down in Victoria, down in the southern state. And then my parents, through a process of being drawn to the Lord, by the Lord into ministry, they went to Wycliffe Bible Translators. Okay. And then my younger sister and I, we went there with them, and stayed there for a year or so. And my interest was always to go back into Wycliffe Bible Translators and become part of that ministry. I studied and worked as a graphic artist, so went through college in Queensland and that sort of thing. And then it was sort of when I went to Capernwray, my parents had been there to get into Wycliffe as a prerequisite to get in as a member. I was doing the same journey as them, but I got a little bit waylaid on the way. I didn't get to Wycliffe in the end.
How did you end up, now you went to school in New Zealand, but that was before it was Monaville, right?
Yes, it was Tarongapai, where I got involved. Once we were married, 6 months later, we moved to New Zealand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you weren't a student.
I was a student in Australia.
In Australia, okay. I'm sorry,
yeah.
I misunderstood that. At
That's
Wongabrae.
Right. Yeah, at Wongabrae.
Okay,
yeah.
and that's where you guys met. Yeah.
Mm.
Elizabeth, when did you become a believer?
When I was 7.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
Okay.
So, a long time ago.
So, okay, now, so does that mean that once you guys met, you got married, that you went back to New Zealand together?
Well, we didn't. Peter was in and out between Australia and New Zealand, and at the time that I came as a student, he was permanent as the director.
Okay.
So he was rested there for a little bit, and I, so it was 87.
87.
Yeah. So that was how it happened, and so after that we ended up, because Noel died tragically, right. And so Peter had to go back to New Zealand for a little while I was still on staff at Capernwray, Australia, and so we had a period of separation there for about nearly close to a year.
How long had you been married?
That was
That was before we were married.
Oh, okay.
At the end of that year, after Peter had been in New Zealand for a while, he came back. He was sort of bobbing in and out a little bit, because sort of directing both centres here and there, because there wasn't anybody permanent in Australia. So, but probably because of the situation with Noel, then he had to sort of bounce between the two. So I was still the secretary in Australia, and then he would come backwards and forwards, and we would catch up a little bit along the way. We only went out 5 times before we were married.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
I'm pretty cheap.
I didn't really. We didn't really know each other that well.
Well, you remedied that. How long have you been married now?
35 years.
Yeah, it's around that.
Yeah.
Okay, 35 years and 2 children, right?
Yeah, 2 children.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so because I'm really curious about this, because I really got to kind of get to know you while you were in New Zealand at Monaville.
Mm.
And I kind of know the story, but not really. How did Torchbearers end up at Monaville? Because you were somewhere else before that, right? Mm-hmm. Mm. Where was that?
Yeah, it is quite a long story. Originally, the ministry started in Auckland under a great guy, Dr. Tony Han, who had been at Cape and Ray, and his wife, and they initially started it. Then after a few years, we moved from that campus, which is a small campus in a suburb, to the Bible College of New Zealand, which allowed us to have a number of students, and the Bible College of New Zealand was so excellent to us. Dr. David Stewart was the principal, and he was very in favour of my dad and Torchbearers. So we ran it there for 5 years. Mm-hmm. Then the Lord opened up a possibility for us to have our own campus again in Auckland, which we did, in Glendine, which is Tarongapai, where Elizabeth and I went. And that was how we started, really, because Noel Hunt, who had been the director, had a heart attack, and suddenly there was a need for somebody to pick it up and run with it. So we lived at Tarongapai in Auckland, West Auckland, for about 8 years, but all the time the campus was not big enough for the demand and for the...
It was quite small, right?
It was it's 17 James Laurie Street. It's a house on the street.
Okay.
But it had quite a big back section and was a 2-story house, and we were able to extend it and build a few things. But it was always restricted, and the council were not happy that we were getting too big. So our ambition was to move outside the city also, because I had an offsider, Peter Bicken, who came on staff and who's a woodsman, a forester,
Yeah.
and he began to do an outdoor ministry. And he said, I always have to drive down a motorway to find some bush to have some fun, So can we go outside the city? And that was a great call. So long story short, we were led by the Lord, I know, to this place near Cambridge, which is Monavale Homestead. And that's such a brilliant complex, and allowed us access to lakes, to mountains, rivers, waterfalls, everything.
Yeah, beautiful area.
It's fantastic, yeah. And, well, it's New Zealand.
Right, exactly, yeah.
End of story.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so the ministry really developed there from 1995. We moved to, currently it's packed with students from all around the world, and we have an adventure camp ministry and ministry through the country as well.
Yeah. I've always been intrigued with that, just how the Lord developed it, and then I got to go one time and was floored. Just wow, this is really something else. What the Lord has done here. We it's so natural for us to limit him, and to limit him to what I can understand and how I can work things out. And to see what he did there with with the properties and the accommodations, just how many people can be accommodated there, is a neat thing to see.
And I think when we were initially thinking of moving, it was a bit funny because no other centres just keep moving. They stay where they put.
Right.
We haven't actually found our feet yet, so that was a little bit unusual for Torchbearers to have a centre that kept moving a little bit. But really, when we looked at the centre as a possibility, it was a bit flash for us. It had a beautiful home, pool and a tennis court, and we thought we don't need all that stuff. But then it was funny because when I was doing some ministry with BSF at the time, and we were sort of having conversations about this with the staff. But and I remember, reading about the children of Israel going into the Promised Land, and it was filled with beautiful things, milk and honey, and the grapes are huge and everything. But the Israelites were nervous to move in, and but I thought we need to move in because God's got something beautiful. Even it looks a little bit flash, and we didn't want to be show-offs, with a new beautiful centre. Mm-hmm. But it just was so lovely to think that He blessed us with a gorgeous place, and it meant that the students that come have an opportunity to really settle and have beautiful places to sit and read the Word, to minister to the local community, bring them into our place. So it was really just a step of accepting what God had given us in a beautiful way and said thank you.
Oh. So how long, Peter, were you the director at Monaville before leaving?
Around about 25 years.
Okay.
In New Zealand. So
right, and then what
bulk
year?
of that was Monaville.
Okay, and then when you guys left Monaville, what year was that?
2013.
2013.
And what was the reason for leaving?
Well, it was a combination, but primarily in Australia, we just had a bit of a gap of leadership. And Haldane Rowan, very faithfully, who is a past director, came out of semi-retirement to kind of hold things together. But there was the board in Australia approached the Torchbearer board in New Zealand and said, could Peter come over and pick it up and run with it, because he used to be here and he understands it in Haldane and he worked together a lot. So it was a little bit of a challenge because we were settled in New Zealand. We were seeing new things happening. We had a South Island centre. We had areas that we were just beginning to feel that momentum was building all the time. But at the same time, quietly, we just had this deep conviction that it was the right thing for us to leave New Zealand and pick up the responsibility in Australia, which we did, and it was challenging days. And then, praise the Lord, fairly quickly things began to pick up again. And a big part of that was our son Callum, who...
Yeah, I was hoping somehow you'd bring him into this.
Well, I was trying to keep him out of it, actually. He's the new big shot. Not really. But he was willing to come, and it was initially just a volunteer role and just support us. And over time, he's now become the principal there, and he's got great dynamism and momentum and capability. And so and Adam Ismail, who's the director, who's just a great man of God. The two of them are doing a great job in Australia. Just got a great sense of leadership and momentum. And so it's a privilege to see where it's come to.
Yeah, the reason I said that is because I remember Callum as a kid, and to just at the conferences and the time that I got to be at Monaville, just one of the Torchbearer kids just running around, and to watch him grow and see his personality start to show, and then to see him, I haven't seen him in years, but I've heard a lot about what's going on, and it's just so neat to see, what the Lord will do, with the heart that is His. Yeah. And see how the Lord's using him now is, thank the Lord for that.
Yeah, and doors have opened with other ministries as well. He combines Torchbearers as his first role, but he works with OM, Operation Mobilization, leads their youth ministries in different in Brisbane, youth events called Teen Street, up to 800 young people for a week of teaching and mentoring, and then they've just started it now in Melbourne, and he's interacting with around the world because it's a big part of OM, and so he's part of that. Also, Dare to Share and Global Leadership Summit. So God's just given him a passion for the Christ life to be proclaimed across the world. But his first call is Australia, and then we have a daughter. Yeah. I know you're coming on to that properly, but Alexandra, she's lovely, and she's a nurse, a local community nurse, does a great job. She married one of our past students, Canadian, that happens. And he's a super guy. Connor is very gifted musically, but very gifted in ministry and heart. And
Where do they live?
They live on site.
Okay.
So he's on staff. He's one of the ministry's coordinators and very much that center of the ministry there. So we're so blessed because we've got our son and daughter and their families right alongside us, because we live off-site about 20 minutes away. So it's not hard to drop in and say good day.
Oh, that's
Two
awesome.
grandchildren.
Oh,
So
and two grandchildren.
I have good reason to go.
Elizabeth, what are the things that the Lord's had to work in your heart? Being the wife of a director, and you've already said that you had you were interested in something else as a younger person, and the Lord changed everything, and now Peter's in New Zealand. Now he's got to go to Australia, and so what are some things the Lord's had to do in your heart with all of that?
Well, it's a growing thing. When we were first married, it was moved away from home in a new environment, a new ministry, and finding my own feet took some time. I was sort of 25 when we got married, and 61 now. So there's been a lot of changes probably as we've travelled, having children and things like that. But in ministry. I suppose when I first was a student, I grew to really love the Lord in my own way, and the Lord drew me to be with him quietly, and so I spent as much time as I possibly could. I wasn't really into all the excitement at Bible school so much. My first semester maybe, but the second one I really just put my head down and felt this was an incredible opportunity to just draw closer to him. Definitely Peter was a great person to prompt me to be involved in teaching and sharing with the girls, and there's been big changes of stepping out of my comfort zone to be preparing messages, women's conferences. I can remember feeling so nervous about getting up, dry mouth and everything, and then within 15 minutes I was on a roll. So I knew that something happened to me. The preparation I loved preparing with the scripture and discovering amazing things, getting off on little tangents. But basically my real concern was, getting up in front of people, and that's taken quite a long time. But there's a freedom in it, and when I know that I can rely on him to have taught me in the quiet places what he wants me to say, then I can be absolutely sure that he will be the one to bring that message to them, even if I'm flippy floppy and not feeling great. But I know within 15 minutes I'm actually settled, and I can actually speak the words that I need to say with freedom. And that's taken a while, but it certainly is a wonderful feeling that I'm not conscious of myself. I'm just conscious of what I'm saying and how I'm sharing it, and it's a powerful feeling that you can just get up there and say what you need to say.
Yeah, that makes me think of the similar lesson the Lord had to teach me. I know without a doubt, at the time, it was the worst class I'd ever taught. I mean, it was a train wreck, and I couldn't get out of the classroom quick enough. And I remember walking down the sidewalk before I was 5 steps away from the room, and I'm already apologizing to the Lord. Lord, I am so sorry. And it was that class that the Lord used to. I just did not see this coming. I got more response, from notes in my box, emails sent to me, people wanting to have some time aside just to talk about this. And in all of that, the Lord just told me, see, Kelly, I really don't need you. I will use you, and I have you there for this. But you can trust me. And I don't say that to say that then we don't need to study, we don't need to to be in prayer about this, but that we can have the confidence that you're talking about, that this is what the Lord's doing, so I can trust him for what he's doing. And it does really change your perspective when you walk into that room. That this is his business and I can trust him for it. He's worked in my heart. Now this is what he's worked, and
Yeah.
and trust him with it. So that's I appreciate you bringing that up. Okay, so now you guys are, I guess the world calls it retired, but that's kind of that's a relative term, I guess. So what are you doing now?
Okay, well, for me, I'm still very emotionally attached in a good way with the Torchbearer ministry in Australia, and so I teach. I'm on the board, and because Callum's there and Adam's so close to him as well, it's easy to drop in and not tell them they're doing everything right or wrong, but just be a friend. And so that's exciting. But I'd already begun to be involved in one or two other ministries just in a quiet way. I contribute to New Life Christian newspaper in Australia. They come out every 2 weeks. It's a free subscription. And so I do some Bible studies for them, done that for the last 2-3 years. I'm involved in another ministry called 1231, based on Mark 12:31, love your neighbor, where we take a theme for a year. There's 2 others who founded it, and I've just come alongside to help them. And that's a very valid ministry that taught me a lot, and we've taken a major theme for a year, and we have home groups and Zoom groups that come in and join us, and we have a speaker presentation. So it wasn't like I wasn't busy, and I was also still opportunity in local churches and things. But what happened fairly quickly after stepping down from full-time leadership at Cape and Ray there at Australia, a local church, a local Baptist church, had a pastor leave, and they just wanted to fill the gap, at least temporarily. So I was invited to be interim pastor at Bowral Baptist Church in Southern Highlands, New South Wales. So that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years. I'm part-time, I'm interim. It's not a permanent position, but I'm very privileged to serve them and grow with the church a little bit. So that's probably the biggest part of my life right now is pastoring the church.
Good. And Elizabeth, what are you doing now?
Well, I suppose, because Peter is a little bit older than me, I couldn't draw pension. That's the word. I wasn't able to draw a pension because I'm not at that stage yet. So I needed to figure out what I was going to do. It's a hard thing to actually go from full-time ministry into what. Yeah. And it's really emotionally difficult. Trying to find out now where do I fit? What ministry would I need to be involved in? And so you don't just fall on your face and end up comatose in a corner because you just don't know what's going on. So I really asked the Lord about what my future would be, but I've sensed that the joy that I have in the gifts that He's given me are in art and creative things. So I have developed a little bit more in painting with portraiture and children's book illustrating, so that my history in graphic art sort of lent itself to going into something like that. But I really asked the Lord for something that would be a bit more bread and butter for us. Yeah. So I asked the Lord when we're off to Canada for Alex and Connor's wedding. I just was, burdened by the mid-range of finance that we needed to cover, and really asked the Lord to provide something that I could do that would bring more income into the family. And so I prayed and asked Him something for that. When we were travelling and we were with some friends, stayed with some past students in Canada, Gerald and Sherry Heinrichs, they were there, and she showed me a business that she had just closed a week ago. And that was really fascinating. She showed me around and she said, "Oh, would you like to have it?" And I said, I don't know how this would work. So I said, please, Lord, let me just go away and pray about this. Because what do you do with a business that's in Canada? Right. What do I do with going to Australia? So I just said to her, well, let's pray about that. And so we went away to the wedding and asked the Lord, if this is not possible for us to buy a business, and we couldn't afford it. So I said, Lord, please, if this is something that the answer to the prayers I've been praying, if this is it, then please, Lord, just get them to offer it to us for free. And I thought, well, that's pretty bold and pretty impossible. Nobody's just going to give you that sort of thing. But they did. When we went back and saw them, they said, we'd love to offer this to you for free. Couldn't believe it. And so her business was in candles and soap and beautiful products that she had developed. So then they sent everything to us in Australia. Yeah, packets of stuff, boxes and things. And so, now I'm just now working out how to use everything.
In the process of getting started with that.
Yeah.
That's, I know what you mean. It's an interesting time to, it's almost like the Lord is just, not almost like it is, the Lord has just completely changed everything. And you have to navigate that with him now. Okay, Lord, what does this look like? And because, we've been through the same thing, and leaving full-time here and moving to Louisiana for 6 years. And like you said, that we need an income. And when we moved there, the economy collapsed 3 months after we moved there. So the job I had was gone. And, I've got parents that are sick, elderly parents that are sick, and, what do we do? And, it's the same thing, where the Lord, he took us and he walked us through it step at a time. We had no idea, what we were doing really. And I tell people now that anyone who has a successful business and thinks they did it is an idiot. Even non-believers will tell you that it takes a lot of luck. But what we have found, no, it's not luck, it's the Lord's favor. And I've seen too, and with watching other things, that even the non-believer that is successful in business, it's simply the Lord's favor. Because you take some people who go to school for this and learn how to do these things and never become anything with it. And then you have people who have no idea what they're doing. And the Lord takes it and he uses it. And that's just been a good lesson for me. I think that's true in Torchbearers even. You look at the centers, and very, very few, can you pick out individuals that have been trained specifically for this administration? But the Lord takes that person and has done some incredible things all around the world.
It's so true. And the early days, you've got pioneers, and they don't fit. They're pioneer for a reason. They don't fit a mold. They just go gangbusters. But the Lord provides other giftings, and other ones come in. And it's lovely. There's no formula. I don't think there is in Scripture either. You're a man or woman of God, and then you're in the kingdom, and you're vital for the kingdom. It may look good, it may be big, it may be small. There's no such thing in God's economy. So, I celebrate the fact. I think there's a place for training. There's a place for learning, expertise, and all of those things. But fundamentally, that does not define the ministry.
Right. And
so be available in every facet, and I'm grateful for those who come with great expertise, and each generation contributes in new areas that we need to be willing to embrace and keep moving forward, etc. But the ultimate explanation is the Lord himself.
That's right.
Foundationally.
Yeah. It's his business.
He's creative.
Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate you giving me this time. Elizabeth, thanks for just really short notice for you. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So we're going to end the interview now, but so the listener knows, Peter's going to be giving a devotion as well, and that will be, we're going to give you that in a couple of weeks from now, so be watching for that. Thank you guys. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
Great time.
You've been listening to the His Hill podcast featuring our host, Kelly Doherty, along with Peter and Elizabeth Thomas, former staff members at our sister school in Australia, Wongerbri. We have reached the middle mark of our fall term here at Bible School. We have a few retreats and a Thanksgiving conference coming up this next month, which will probably make the remaining days fly by. Please keep our current students in your prayers as the semester continues on, that they would seek Him above all and love each other well. Once again, you've been listening to the His Hill podcast featuring our host, Kelly Doherty, along with Peter and Elizabeth Thomas. We serve a God who gives and takes with purpose and care, whose understanding is infinite, and who is faithful to complete the good work He began. He is surely worth fixing our eyes on. So remember to fix your eyes on Him. Thanks again for tuning in with us today. I'm Lizzie, and we'll see you next week.